Stripes are one of the simplest ways to add interest to your double knitting board sampler. So let's look at stripes first. They can be really wide stripes or moderate, as these two in the blanket are. They do not have to be the same size as each other. I used wide black and narrow white. You can have a single stripe, a pair of skinny stripes with wide stripes around them. They all work the same way. For the next section, we'll knit stripes. So not a loop hanging on the first of the pegs, and put the tail between the boards. And these are stockinette stripes. They could be something else, but stockinette makes a perfectly nice stripe. So we'll wrap normally and knit this row. And while I do, I will talk about stripe knitting. The stripe can, of course, be any number of stitches, rows wide. They could be one, could be wider, could be even huge, like 30. So there's a lot of design option for you there. If you are knitting single stripes, single row stripes, the yarns can both stay attached beside the board, and you just pick up whichever color you need for the next row. And they alternate very nicely without making any problems or messes. So for this first stripe, that's what I'm going to do. A one row stripe of white, then another one row stripe of turquoise. So we'll just alternate the yarns. Then we'll make a wider stripe so I can show you how to make that neat and tidy at the edge also. I've knitted with the white. It's really almost a light beige, but I'll call it white. Ready for this. This was the last peg knitted, whether I knitted it in the white or the blue. So I'm coming across to the first peg just as always. Stockinette wrap. In the normal manner, there's really nothing different about this row than any other stockinette knitting. All right, so we have a one row white stripe, but I'd like my next blue stripe to be 3 rows. And if I wrap like this as usual, this will run up the outside of the fabric. And after very many rows, that gets to be an obvious float. A float is what we call a strand of yarn that's straight and not knitted in. But we can get it to knit in by moving it over here before wrapping. And then we'll move it back out. And in so doing, we'll manage to get it interlaced with the edge of the fabric. The second row is wrapped, second row of blue. Now I'll just move the white yarn out to the side again and knit the row over. Moving it in again so it travels up the inside of the fabric, just as described, wrapping the next blue row, and then we will use the white again. This premise works for stripes, whether they are 2 rows wide or 50 rows wide. Now, if you look down the edge of the fabric very closely, especially if the contrasting of the colors is great, you may be able to catch a glimpse of the yarn that's being carried up. It may not be totally invisible. It will depend on how tightly the knitting is being created, which is personal taste, how the degree to which the colors contrast, and several things, but it won't be a mess. And most important in my eyes, it won't tend to snag on things and thus destroy the knitting, which a yarn traveling up the outside edge will tend to do. Now, after this, I would like to knit a white row. Just one. So I move the blue yarn out of the way as much as possible. Bring the white yarn to the top where I can feed it neatly and make the normal wrap. It's been traveling up the center. Now, this is completely optional, but I don't really like myself the stitch that I get if it comes straight from the center over here. So I'm going to wrap the back, but that will be the last stitch too. I will have added a second wrap of white here. And as I said, it's a judgment call. It's your personal taste, but it's the way that I like the edge better. Oops. Last stitch. And now I will pick up both the blue loop and the white pre-wrap, we'll call it, and knit them over. And the rest of the row is completely normal for knitting. When we're done with one of the colors, break it and lay the yarn between the two boards. But there is a refinement that I like to use. What I just showed you is the classic method, but I like to get it anchored a little bit better, like that. Now I will knit these 2 stitches off as though they were one, and then the yarn tail truly cannot escape. And now I'm going to proceed in blue for a while.